Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Discourse for the week of May 3rd, 2021. The Discourse is our weekly news show here at the NYU Game Center, the game design department at New York University. Each week, Professors Frank Lance and Naomi Clark talk about game industry news and give us their scorching hot takes. Take it away, Frank and Naomi.
Right.
Oh,
hey, Naomi.
Good to see you, Frank. How's it going?
Things are good. How's everything going with you?
They're not bad. It's getting warmer outside. I guess that's nice.
Fully
I
vaccinated?
don't know. Yeah, fully vaccinated.
I just is everybody in the chat fully vaccinated now?
Yeah, give a shout out if you've had that,
shout out if
second
you're,
Moderna or that first J&J.
You give us. Are you one shot in, two shots, second shot tomorrow? Good news.
Yeah. I saw just a flood of people posting about their symptoms from their shots just in the last week or so. So it's really getting out there. It got to be so much that I then made a joke tweet about experiencing like extremely weird alien symptoms from having too many vaccination shots, but it wasn't that funny.
Yeah, it's the chip. It's the Bill. It's the Microsoft.
Yeah, the
chip.
Bill Gates 5G chip.
chip.
Have you guys got your 5G chip? Because you got to get that next. That's right.
I feel kind of cold and fluey, and I also feel a strong desire to rate them out of 5 stars on how I enjoyed my experience. So
exactly. We're gonna that's the next step of human evolution is increase the share of ratings. All right, let's with that.
All right, so we're gonna
dive right into it.
We're going to start out by continuing the topic that we ended with last week. We didn't really get enough chance to really dig into some of the AI shenanigans that are happening around voice and voice acting. To begin with, we looked at this Witcher 3 mod where we played a clip from this AI, right? Yeah, let's listen to it again though, because it's really interesting. The idea is that this mod they have managed to use. Well, okay, this is the thing that's a little bit of a shenanigan, because my read of this is that these are clips that they've rearranged. So these are existing clips that they've taken from this actor. There must be like 12,000 hours of Geralt saying stuff, and I think they've chopped it up. I don't think this is mostly synthetic, but let's listen to it because I think it's pretty good quality.
Release him. Now. I'm in a hurry and you're hiding behind a child. So you'll live this time. I'm letting you.
No.
I'll come back for you one day. You realize that, right?
I think that's good enough. We don't need to hear anymore.
Yeah, that's good.
Here's my take. That is not Doug Cockle, the voice actor of Geralt of Rivia.
Okay.
And those are not lines that would have been written for any of the Witcher games.
So you think this is a genuinely kind of synthetic text-to-speech?
I think it's synthetic because it's kind of poorly written and poorly delivered. And
well, I mean, it is a video game.
It is. No, but here's the thing. Yeah, so Doug Cockle is a good choice to try and emulate because he talks in a very consistent way. He does this Geralt of Rivia voice, which then interesting, like Henry Cavill is now imitating that guy, right? Like when he's doing the sort of Netflix Witcher show, but he just has this gravelly monotone. And I've listened to pretty much everything that he's recorded as Geralt of Rivia, unless he's done some commercials. And yeah, it's like, I don't know. I know exactly how bad The Witcher is, and it's bad in certain ways. It's like bad in like a, I don't know, pretentious, oversexed teenager writing a story kind of way. But the I don't know. And the whole story of the Witcher games is kind of a strange rearrangement of the original novels. But the dialogue isn't that bog standard. That's the thing. Like I don't recognize it. Not that I would remember every single line, but I think it's like just one cut below. This feels like a generic imitation of The Witcher rather than like the specific flavor of generic badness that is
Victor in chat is pointing out that in the article, which we read thoroughly, by the way, we read every note, every single word of these articles before we discuss them, but that it is according to the article, it's a mix mix of
right. Okay.
of synthetic voice and splicing.
I can see that.
I think you're right. I think there is some genuine synthetic stuff in here.
Right. So it's not the whole line. The whole line was not taken from somewhere else in the series because, right. But like certainly words or whatever. And since that's, I don't know, is it fair game? But yeah, but does it matter? Right. The whole idea is that now you can make your own mod and you can make it sound like Doug Cockle is voicing whatever lines you want him to say. And the sad thing about that is that these lines are even worse than the regular Witcher script.
Well, I mean, I kind of like the Witcher aesthetic. I like that kind of like a full-on heavy metal kind of approach, pulpy approach to things. I don't mind
I feel strangely defensive. Maybe I think I have Stockholm syndrome with The Witcher, where I'm like, no, this character is actually kind of interesting because he's just so tired of the world that he lives in, the fantasy, the premise of the fantasy world that he lives in. He's just totally sick of it, and
Warsaw syndrome, maybe. How about that?
Yeah, Warsaw syndrome. There we go. That's more appropriate.
Okay, so let's look at the way, let's look at the way Obsidian is doing this, because this was another interesting article that I think Salty Horse posted in the chat last week that we didn't get a chance to look at. But Obsidian is creators of what games do Obsidian make?
Just a whole bunch of games, like probably maybe best known for Fallout New Vegas, but also all of the now I'm spacing out on their ones that take place in their own little fantasy world.
But what they do is they're using this synthetic voice stuff in pre-production before they bring in the actors. They write the script, they use these synthetic voices in the game to get the timings right and to see how as a placeholder, and then they bring in actors to do the final thing. So let's
Pillars of Eternity. Shout out to Pillars of Eternity. That's their big franchise.
Is that Obsidian? Oh, it's such a good game. Okay, Logan, back up and play the first part of this. Let's listen to how these sound.
I can see this hurts, but I had to tell you sooner.
Forget it. I trusted you.
But if you look at it...
You never listen. You don't listen. You're never here when I need you.
AI voices are transforming how game developers...
So that's good.
That sounds pretty good. I mean, it's clearly like one
it has
note.
A different texture.
That note is definitely acting. It's very actorly, right? There's a lot of emotion.
It's almost like I don't know. Like I feel like you could get this kind of performance out of some humans if they were like a certain type of actor who hadn't really developed their own style yet, or achieved any distinction or something like that, right? It's you can sort of insert a generic actor and the AI can perform that for you with like a very specific emotional tone that like doesn't really have any nuance or flavor to it, right?
But here's my take on this, Naomi. I think what we're discovering is that what we always thought that the AI that the sort of AI personality would be is robotic. Monotone, mechanical, and robotic, and that's how you would identify AIs.
Right, because it was going to sound like a machine. Right?
Sounds like a machine, right? But what we're learning, but both in reading GPT-3 generated text and in listening to some of these AI synthetic voices, that the real hallmark of AI is not mechanical roboticness, but rather a kind of smarmy, slick. It's really good at like hitting this kind of like smooth.
It's exactly what you expect, and you don't notice anything out of the ordinary about it. Right?
It's super plausible. It's super smooth. It's like
in fact, it's too much so, right?
It's like a con man's patter or a magician's patter. It's not the data like I don't know what emotions are. Instead, it's the slick guy who likes whispering in your ear and is just you just don't notice because everything.
Well, it's like being able to tell fake wood grain from real wood grain, right, or something like that, right? Where you're like, okay, this is.
You shouldn't be looking for sharp angles and like rigid mechanical mathematical stuff.
Yeah, fake wood grain doesn't have pixels in it. Yeah, it is
this goopy kind of too slick quality.
So I don't know. I think that Danny has put his finger on this is the real damage that's done by this is that it changes people's tastes who are making creative decisions. The people who who have, let's say, less taste or are less particular about the performances they're looking for or the music they're putting in, are going to have an excuse to be like, oh, look, no, actually, there is an exact middle ground baseline for performance, and this is the standard. The standard is set by the AI, which in turn was trained by humans in some sort of Stanislaw Lem-like recursion, right?
Yeah.
And so then the humans learn back from the AI of like, well, this is what it's supposed to sound like. Now, of course, we can resist that. You can resist that by actually having taste and being interested in human nuance and idiosyncrasy and performance.
And I think for me personally, part of the way of resisting that is to embrace the qualities, the aesthetic qualities of AI generated stuff,
right? And name it for what it is. Exactly. It's a separate thing.
To learn to appreciate it and identify in the same way that the sound of an amplified instrument, right, is not, it's not that it ruined our ability to appreciate the sound of acoustic guitars. It's like we learn to appreciate the kind of distortion that you get with electric amplification, right? I think that's part of this process of integrating these new tools into our aesthetic appreciation.
Yeah, so probably what's incredibly important, given that we can't just be like, I don't know, smash the machines with hammers or whatever. That's
why would you want to smash the machines?
I don't know. That's one alternative, right? That's the Luddite alternative. I just don't think it works. That's probably the main thing. But it's to really say like, oh, look, this is a particular flavor. It may seem like it's not, but what you're actually tasting here, this is the flavor of white bread. This is the flavor of, just rice with that like is completely bland, right? Or something like that. It's the average flavor. And
it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be completely bland, right?
It doesn't have to be completely bland. Well, it can be sad flavored. Sad flavored.
Used, right? It's how it's used. It's the way in which if it's used to try to fool you, if it's used as a kind of a pack, like a filler element that's meant to just kind of like quietly fill in the gaps, then yeah, it's gross. But if it's used intentionally for its intrinsic aesthetic qualities,
right?
Then I think that's what's interesting, genuinely interesting and good.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious what the potential is going to be, right? Because it's so like not strong tasting, right? It just tastes just like you would expect. So
let's look at this. Let's look at this next piece, because I think this is a good example of what I think.
Yeah, this one is different. This is different.
This is a good example of what I think of as being a kind of embracing the overall aesthetic. This is something done by a guy named Mersmensch, which I guess is a Kurt Schwitters reference. Shout out to Kurt Schwitters. But Mersmensch, the thing that's interesting about this is that it is the text is done by, the poem was written by GPT-3. The portrait was created with Artbreeder, which is it's a online based thing you can go to. The animation was generated with talkingheads.com, which is again just a thing that you can get access to. And then the music was from OpenAI Jukebox, and the voice is done by this thing called Replica Studios. So he's taking all these off-the-shelf things, he's putting them together into this little generated character, and let's look at the results. I think they're pretty cool.
Round worlds go round, all the time, swirling, revolving, sun, moon, and stars, spinning like fireflies, merry-go-rounds, countless seconds, tick and talk, all of the time, day and night, on, off, on.
I mean, there's something weird and nice. It's
in the combination of these things, right?
The thing that I think of when I look at that is that it looks like one big compression artifact. It's like you're looking at the world and you're trying to see the world through the eyes of a neural net, right? The way the neural net sees the world, it's just texture. It's like this weird combination of numbers that are like related to each other, and the whole thing is like just a giant JPEG artifact.
Right, it's something like how a fly sees the world and kind of recombines it, except maybe the inverse of that. But yeah, I think there is something sort of nice about this that emerges from the decisions that were made of like combining and juxtaposing these techniques on their own. Each of these things is somehow not interesting. I don't know, right? Or like they have some of this texture or this flavor. You can be like, okay, this is kind of strangely generic poetry. This is a sort of an unusual Artbreeder look that's been accomplished, and it's kind of artifacty animation. None of those would be interesting on their own, but you do get something that feels creative coming out of the combination. I don't know.
Again, I think it has to do with like, what's your intention, right? Are you trying to do something new and kind of original, or are you trying to trick people with a copy of something?
Right, and well, this is closely not
tricking to like the existing kind of like acting on The Witcher. Like, who cares about that? But like, if the idea is to strike out into new territory and discover what's possible with these, with little characters that are genuinely kind of artificial, then I think it could be interesting. Yeah,
and it's probably just my taste. I'm the most interested in the stuff that's unusual or unpredictable or seems completely different from what a human would make, like the Google Translate poetry that we were doing a few years ago.
Oh, I love that stuff. It's exactly
that stuff was great.
I think those kinds of language experiments are the real precursors to GPT-3. It's
right. That's right. Yeah.
And William Burroughs cut up stuff. And stream of consciousness writing, Joyce and Virginia Woolf and people like that. I think that's the real ancestors or precursors to this stuff.
I agree. No, but the low hanging fruit for like, how could you make a buck off of this? Is probably something like, we don't have to pay voice. We pay voice trainers instead of voice actors.
Hold on, I'm taking notes. Hold on, what was it again?
Yeah, go for it. Okay. Yeah, we get our great voice actors to voice the really important parts of the story where we need a good performance, and then we pay them a lot less. And this is honestly probably something that the voice actors union is going to get involved in, right?
It is interesting. I don't know what this pen is. Is this a pen with an eraser on it? I just grabbed this pen. Yeah, and there's an eraser on the end. This is how committed I am to the gag. The interesting thing about that point, Naomi, is the Obsidian stuff that we looked at. They're using a service where they hire actors, they generate these different voices based on specific actors, and then those actors participate in the revenue. So it is like an extra revenue stream for these actors who kind of own some of the IP of the voices that are based on them. I think that's pretty interesting.
Right. No, I think that's quite responsible. And I can understand why Obsidian's doing it. They're not a giant AAA studio or anything like that, but they have way more voice acting needs than like almost any other studio. Because they write too much stuff. They write way too much stuff. And there's a bunch of people that we know who could be partially blamed for all that writing. But because the production standard for a AAA RPG is now like everything has to be voiced, they're in this situation where they have to figure out how to make it up cheaply. And I think that creates this, so from what I understand, Obsidian is mostly using this in pre-production, and then they're getting this stuff voiced, right? But I think it's really just a hop, skip, and a jump from there for somebody to be like, okay, well, we pay the voice actors for the good stuff, and then we kind of spackle in like the filler. And it is kind of like, you have the front of the IKEA table is made with real wood, and then inside it's all sawdust, right? And so I guess it's like, what do we think about that as the state of performance?
Here's what I think. What I'm interested in seeing is the thing that the Eameses did with plywood. Remember when that famous Eames chair that's bent plywood, these gorgeous, like they were some of the first people, some of the first designers to kind of embrace these new materials for their own sake.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And that's going to be a really nice, expensive, wonderful. There's going to be something that's equivalent to that nice, expensive, wonderful chair. And like that chair, a few people are going to get to enjoy it and understand how good it is.
What's interesting about it is the Eames figured out a way of taking plywood, the least expensive material, and making something extremely expensive.
Extremely expensive, right? So there's always that space exists. But then there we go.
There you go. Oh my God!
Exactly. There's
the best.
That one is perfect.
Logan,
extremely good game.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at.
Beautiful. Right, so we like that. That's the Game Center gets a brand of approval. Use something cheap to make something incredibly expensive, but
that's right.
It probably doesn't, and it has some effect aesthetically on the rest of furniture design, right? But it's not the thing that's mainstream or whatever.
Yeah. And then 40 years later or 70 years later, it'll show up on Blue Dot or Design Within Reach, and it'll still be too expensive. Okay, so let's look at this next one.
Yeah, let's keep going.
This next one, Naomi, you found.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This
so
isn't AI, but it is like
this
sort of
AI.
NFT adjacent.
Kind of. No, the reason that we didn't get to this last time was because we were talking about this NFT horse racing, and I just wanted to point out that this is currently the mobile game that is the most popular in the world that's not being talked about elsewhere. So I'm not sure if it's on the top of the charts. It was on the top of the mobile game charts. Some of you might remember this because there was an anime that came out in 2018 for it. I think the idea hopefully is obvious just from watching. But the anime was actually an adaptation of a video game that didn't exist yet, which is that's sort of wonderful in and of itself, because the video game, of course, got delayed because it took too long and it had problems. So the video game only recently came out. The anime, the first season of it came out 3 years ago. But yeah, this is just incredibly popular. And you can see why it's incredibly popular, at least in Japan. Because it's a combination of horse racing and beauty pageants and raising Sims, right? It's a race. And so it's like, oh, yes, this idea is somehow totally obvious and also so ludicrous that, of course, nobody has done it before. Yeah, that's Salty Horse is asking, can they get injured? I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't looked deeply into it enough, but I would be surprised if there wasn't some sort of at least spraining of an ankle, and then they have to go see the kindly doctor, because the aesthetic here is all sort of like wholesome horse girls. Right. I don't think there's breeding.
There are friendships and rivalries,
exactly,
and all kinds of emotional, connections and gossip and fun stuff.
That's like right. That. And there's no breeding because these horse girls are all reincarnations of famous racing horses from the real world. That have been reincarnated as girls. Now it's sort of like a Island of Dr. Moreau in reverse kind of experiment.
Sure.
But I think probably in season 5, Secretariat shows up and she's like a really, really classy, intimidating girl with the glasses or something like that. Yeah.
This game also has what I think should be the new official theme song for the Discourse.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, if we could cue that one up, Logan. Listen to this, Naomi. I think it's fantastic. This should be our new song.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Is this AI generated like 90s
it's pretty
sort of
good.
jazzy
it's a pretty good track. I think
intro.
this should be our song for sure. So that's the headline from this one for me.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I just think that it's worth knowing about this game, right? Because it's doing gangbusters.
I do think that this is one of the topics that I truly love, the hugely successful game that no one is aware of.
No one's aware of in the sort of the Western
within
discourse.
Within our circles or within kind of like the industry, or indie scene and stuff. So the next thing is a full-on AI story. The AI Dungeon folks have amped up their content moderation, and a lot of fans are upset for privacy issues. They feel like it's invasive of their privacy. So it's a really delicate, difficult challenge for the team at AI Dungeon to try to prevent people from using AI Dungeon to create inappropriate content, like porn that's or sexual encounters with underage people or things like that, right? So and meanwhile, one of the surprising things that if you read this article, or maybe not so surprising, is that it turns out that more than half of the content being generated in AI Dungeon is porn.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, so I didn't realize that people were using AI Dungeon for this, but it makes perfect sense that because it generates a choose your own adventure style experience that can be about whatever you want it to be. So you can basically use it as your own text adventure fleshlight. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it is. Have you ever played around with AI Dungeon?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so it is a weird experience, and it's sort of like improv theater, right? So you're kind of like jamming with the machine, and you're collaborating on storytelling, and sometimes things get a little saucy, they just do. And you end up like kind of going down that road. It's a weird kind of experience. But I think it turns out, like, again, this is what we're learning about AI. Like we thought we knew what the AI future would be. We thought it would be data and but you know what? It's going to be more like Bender. It's going to be the AI future is more like Bender. It's horny. It's drunk. It's like, it's funny. It's kind of charming in a sleazeball way. I think that's what we're learning about AI.
Yeah, I think this is the privacy things here are really fascinating too, right? Because
what do you think about? What's your instinct here?
So it's interesting in part because it's a use case that, like, obviously the people running AI Dungeon didn't really anticipate, right? But it's almost like people are using this as a form of journaling, right? It's maybe how I'm kind of thinking about it. They're like, okay, I'm in my private chat room that's just generating my own fantasies. And that clearly is such a powerful use of AI Dungeon if you just think about it for 1 second.
Yeah.
Because it is a little bit like, I don't know, just hooking your brain up to some dream generator and having weird dreams, right? And in that way, that AI is sort of like has the dreams of human beings manifested kind of quality. And so, when we think about if that had been what it was designed for, then of course we would say, like, oh yeah, that's private. You don't like go into someone's little private dream booth and be like, what are you dreaming about? Because that would be disgusting at some deep human level. But now the specter that there might be child porn surfacing somewhere on here, which is of course always the number one thing. I think I mentioned this last week. That's going to rear up and terrify platform operators, has caused them to crack down and kind of reveal. I think this is said at the end of Gita's article here too, that like, that they had to be surveilling these people all along, that there was surveillance built into this, which is always true of any online journaling site or anything, right? Like this weird, we're pretending that this surveillance isn't possible and built into the platform when of course it is. People are like, oh, my Slack DMs to my coworkers and classmates are totally private, when it's possible that an admin could read all of it. And just for the record, we don't do that at the Game Center. But unfortunately, because it's Slack, we could. Like, this possibility is built into all of these systems. But I don't know, like that to me, that social human question is the really interesting one. Like, I think it's great if people are using AI to like create their own little closed circuit fantasies. And we should have some social standards or even legal standards, I don't know, about being like, look, what happens here stays here. You get to have your own private booth. Nobody's going to barge in on you. Nothing is being recorded. And there's no, like, we just destroy everything instantly. So there's not any way that like anybody is gonna be like, come crack down on us. Now the problem is that's kind of impossible in this world, because did you see this thing about the people who were the Trump operatives who were trying to overturn election results? They were using Signal to try and have private conversations that nobody could eavesdrop on. But then, because Signal doesn't preserve anything, right? It just, everything's destroyed instantly. They took screenshots of their own conversations to be like, oh, I need to preserve this for posterity. And then the screenshots were subpoenaed, and now they're part of a case against these shenanigans.
So interesting, right? It does seem like the threshold has to do with the moment of sharing rather than the moment of generation. Like, like if people are using AI like a typewriter or a word processor or a pencil or a box of crayons or paints, right? It does seem like the moment that that is important, the threshold that is important, is the moment where you broadcast, distribute, or share the results of that. And if you never do that, then maybe it has the status of privately held thoughts. Right?
Yeah, something like that. Now, that I think the practical issue is that it could always leak out, right? Like, if I'm having some sort of completely sick fantasy on AI Dungeon, not that I am, or not that I would admit it to any of you. I wouldn't be able to tell any of you what it's about, but it's horrible. And then I was like, oh, this one was really good. I have to take a screenshot of this for later. right? Then that creates a hole where it could be like, oh, somebody could eventually get that screenshot. Then AI Dungeon would have hell to pay, and so
I mean,
that
on a practical level, AI Dungeon. They have a deal with OpenAI, the creators of GPT-3, who manage GPT-3. So it's like one of the engines in AI Dungeon that you can have access to is this GPT-3. And OpenAI themselves are very, very careful. They're very sensitive to this issue. They see it as a major part of their charter to be out ahead of these problems. And so I think the AI Dungeon folks are probably kind of inheriting this from the policies that are in place at OpenAI. And that's really where this is coming from.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And so it's like a big, PR concern in some ways too. Right?
I mean, these are issues that we're going to be dealing with for the next decade, right. I think. I think it's going to be an interesting time. And there's going to be stuff where like there are songs that are generated kind of in collaboration with these neural nets that then go on to become huge kind of viral hits. And the fight over who owns them or who should profit from them is going to be really tricky and interesting. Privacy
absolutely.
issues and everything else. Yeah.
But we will have to accept that there's going to be a lot of horniness involved because it is
AI. This is what we're learning. AI is horny.
Yeah, it's horny. It's because human beings are fucking way too horny.
Yeah. But human beings have managed, like, ironically, human beings can keep it in check better. Like, we have all these mechanisms to keep it in check, but we've made these little bundles of kind of human energy that are not they're not constrained. Like, think of what we do with children, right? You've got a child, right? You know what we do with children.
Yeah. Well,
every day we're constraining. We're teaching them to put up their shields. We're teaching them to like put the bridle in their mouth and put the
don't put that poop in your mouth.
Like, always be kind of like checking themselves in context of who they're with. Their behavior needs to be checked, Well,
and what they say,
they're just like gremlins that are like, have been given water after midnight.
One of the things that that they say about little kids is that the reason that they're so loud, or that when they shriek or whatever, it's just like utterly piercing, is because they have access to their full vocal range in a way that almost nobody else does. And that to be like an opera singer, say, you have to learn to like re-access that full vocal range. And I was reading a while back like an interview with an opera singer about this, being like, we try to get back to that state of being like a 2-year-old and just being like, and so
artists like this too. Artists often talk about that kind of relationship, needing to to kind of dismantle some of the things that we spend our whole lives putting into place to keep ourselves in check, so that our private thoughts don't break the rules that open AI of society has implanted in our brains. Yeah.
Right. And there's so much garbage, of course, that we know would get spewed out, just like AI spews racist or sexist or horny stuff everywhere. But it's funny because this idea of a limiter, right? Like, catch that and don't do it. It's almost like I feel like I've read about that person in short stories about AI, right? Or like it's an Isaac Asimov thing, right? Of being like, if we have AIs, we have to be like, don't do this. Don't yell poop in public like really loud or whatever, right? And somehow that part of the sci-fi hasn't come true because that's not the most immediately profitable part. I don't know.
Yeah, and like the Ted Chiang, I think, is the contemporary science fiction author whose work I think is super relevant to a lot of these topics. The life cycle of synthetic creatures or something like that. It's a wonderful short story about all this stuff. Ted Chiang is just brilliant. I really shout out to
Agreed. Yeah. Absolutely. Check it out. And we got a correction from Salty Horse. Salty Horse is correct. I was wrong when I said the Signal conversation where people were taking screenshots of their own bad deeds. That was actually had to do with the case where Matt Gaetz was paying off women. A message that was sent to Roger Stone about how he had paid for sex with a minor. So it was not the exact scandal that I was thinking of. Yeah.
But that's the kind of 7-dimensional chess move that you expect.
That's
from
right.
a guy like Vic. Yeah, it's just always thinking ahead. Always thinking ahead. Yeah. All right. So let's jump to the next thing. So this is a deep fake or something. This is character that people have invented that they claim to have discovered in a data dump of old Mario games. It's a character called Scrupulous Fingor. It's a floating head and a little floating hand that points at things. And people, first, it was a hoax where people said, look, I've unpacked the data from this old Mario game, and it has this character that they never used. And then other people jumped on and said, oh yeah, no, I found similar, this is a character that they didn't use in a bunch of games. And so people are claiming to have found Scrupulous Fingor in all kinds of old Mario games, and the internet loves it.
I wish I could talk about this, but when I was 14, I lived in Osaka, and I did some testing on some Mario games, and I had to sign an agreement that I would not talk about Scrupulous Fingor.
Oh, okay. So fair enough.
I just have no comment.
That which we are not allowed to talk about, we must pass over in silence.
That's right. Yeah, and I will say, just at the aesthetic level, there's something interesting in general about this type of character. Like there was a Simpsons character that was also inserted. I can talk about the Simpsons version of this, right? There was a Simpsons character who people found in like like some frames of the Simpsons, and that was also that was added, and looks a lot like Scrupulous Fingor, and maybe it's an imitation of Scrupulous Fingor, I'm not sure, but it's a strange kind of like elongated head. I think that there's something that this to me is the inverse in some ways of AI generated stuff, because this it's not attempting to look like a real organic part of this world. Yeah. It's like clearly something that's intruding from outside in a way that's creepy, right? And that like doesn't try to pretend that it's not a meme or a creepypasta or something like that. And that's precisely why it works, and like what its staying power is. And it might be an Undertale reference. I'm not sure what. I can't remember the name of the Simpsons character now. It's called something like Scumbly or something, but there was a thing a while back with a similar character that was supposedly deleted from the Simpsons.
Yeah. The next item is another a bit of AI news. This is a milestone in competitive crossword tournaments that an AI called Dr. Phil, F-I-L-L, has competed successfully for the first time as software in a big tournament. You can imagine how hard crossword puzzle solving is as an AI problem, because crossword puzzles are full of wordplay and puns and things like that, and as well as like common sense references. So this is a big deal. I think one of the interesting things here is that this particular program was a combination of two approaches, one of which is called good old-fashioned AI. That's where you have logic, symbolic logic manipulation. You're having rules. You're trying to like really, this is what people thought AI was going to look like before machine learning and kind of
neural nets,
propagation kind of like really took off in the past couple of years. So it's a mix of that kind of more structured AI approach and like pure kind of data-driven machine learning, generative neural net.
Because the original Dr. Phil, which had the old school approach, kind of knows a lot about the structure, the rules, the mechanics of crosswords. Yeah. And that's the part that it did. But then all of this sort of understanding the language and like the possible answers. It was like if you had a collaboration between someone who was like very good at crosswords, but like had a small vocabulary, and someone who was like enormously well read, but had like never seen a crossword before or something like that.
Yeah, like the two of us.
Exactly. Which one am I?
That's why we make such a good team.
There's
I think this is what it's going to look like. I think this is what a lot of a successful AI is going to look like in the future. It's going to be a mix of these two approaches. It's not going to be pure black box neural nets. We have no idea. We just like throw a bunch of data at it and it generates a solution, nor is it going to be this pure, transparent, crystalline thing where, yes, we understand the underlying, dynamics of how to do crossword puzzles. It's going to be, I think, this hybrid approach, and so I think this is a build.
Yeah, and actually that's somewhat reassuring, because there's the pure, we don't know what it's doing. It's just an algorithm. Like it's starting to grate with people being like, don't ask us what's happening inside that box. We were just the engineers, kind of stuff. But maybe the leavening that with some actual understanding of systems, which is what that might be a good thing, coming from the opposite ends. Yeah, so that's great. I think the thing that sort of rubbed me the wrong way about this story was the promotional approach that the creator of Dr. Phil had taken, where he's like, I'm going to, every year, Dr. Phil is going to compete with all the human crossword solvers. And eventually, like, all the humans are like, aggressively, I don't care about Dr. Phil, whatever. And like, even one of the top crossword people is like, to be frank, I don't think about Dr. Phil at all, which of course is like the most like cut direct kind of rudeness. And of course, that's not what's interesting about Dr. Phil. And this guy, like, okay, good job, Matthew Ginsburg, but like, read the room.
Right, exactly. Who would have thought that this guy wouldn't have a good, subtle grasp of the nuance of social interaction? But it's interesting how this stuff is going to affect online games, competitive games, tournaments, and things like that. I just got a text last night from friend of the show, Andy Nealon, who was telling me he was watching a match between, I think it was between Hikaru and someone else online. But the way, like, watching chess has now changed because of how they use engines. So they have these really powerful engines which can show not necessarily the optimal move, but the moves that are very close to optimal or far beyond what humans are capable of doing. And so as you're watching, what you really are appreciating is, even if you don't know chess really well, you can see how close the players are to hitting these kind of finding these optimal solutions. And it's
like as if there's a waveform that, like, you're watching a surfer like approach and depart the waveform.
And it's almost like the way whole card camera changes poker, right? So with the whole card camera, you can see what Tom Dwan can't, right? You get to see the two cards that Tom Dwan's opponent has, and he can't. It gives you this little edge. Like, you're never going to be as good at poker as Tom Dwan, but you get to.
But you have a different point of view, right? Yeah,
and so that's like it dramatizes it, improve how these games work as entertainment.
But this Dr. Phil is a great example of a complete failure of that, because it doesn't make any sense to have Dr. Phil compete against human players, and it's pointed out why in this article. The top human players have zero mistakes. All of them have zero mistakes, and the way that they differentiate from each other is how fast they can do it. On the other hand, Dr. Phil has lightning speed in a way that's not the interesting part about Dr. Phil, right? The fact that it can perform these searches really, really fast, and if you give it a whole bunch of computing power. What's interesting is that Dr. Phil makes mistakes, right? So they're almost inverses of each other. And like, Dr. Phil makes less mistakes now that it teamed up with this other AI. So like, why are they in the same competition? Like,
people should be looking to chess, I think, as a really good place where this stuff is being worked out. There's a thriving audience. There's still a competitive scene. They're incorporating these solvers and these AIs. And it needs to be done in a thoughtful way. I think just blundering into a human tournament and saying you're going to compete,
it's very silly. But there's an interesting challenge. Could you design a tournament where there's actually an interesting interplay between AI players and human players, where you can appreciate the differences in performance between them and the differences in style, because they do have different styles and they make different types of mistakes or slow down in different places. So to draw that out for a spectator would be that's the sublime thing about tournament design. But of course, not that many people think that deeply about designing tournaments like that, maybe outside of really
David Serlin on this problem.
Exactly.
In the chat, we're talking about the sort of hybrid approach where humans and AIs work together. For for a hot minute, that was going to be the big thing in chess. It was called Centaur chess. And it was humans and AIs working together. And it was about like 1 month in which that was optimal. And then it was quickly surpassed by pure AI. Like adding a human,
get off my back,
now just makes the AI worse. So
it turns out that jockeys actually add weight to horses. And so it's better for the NFT horses to run by themselves or to just become pretty girls who also have relationships with each other.
This is the ultimate lesson of Uma Musume Pretty Derby.
That's right. There's nobody riding on the back of those girls. That would be degrading.
That would be degrading.
Let's go.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk a little bit about because Naomi, you and I are big shots in the world of games journalism. Obviously, I mean we don't just report the news; we sometimes make the news.
I used to write reviews of games.
There are other people operating in this space. I know a lot of people just come straight here for all their gaming news, but a lot of people, they like to look at other things. So there's a couple interesting things that were happening that I thought were worth talking about. One is Stephen Totilo, who left from the head spot at Kotaku, has now landed at a place called Axios, where he is going to be running a newsletter. And I think the first one is due out today. So I'm checking my inbox. I don't have it yet. So come on.
Okay, that'll be interesting to we should. Wait, do you have to pay for this, or is Axios just publishing?
No, I think it's just it's like one of these new things where I'm sure at some point there will be an option to pay for a version that where Stephen Totilo shows up at your house and dismantles your Rock Band drum set for you or something like that. But for now, I think it's all free, and I think it's kind of it's like in keeping with like Matt Iglesias leaving Vox and going over to Substack. Is that where a lot of
Substack is its own weird thing, right? It's a platform like Medium or something. Axios is a news organization that was founded by some people from Politico a while back. And I didn't notice them really until they started infesting my Apple News app. Because they must have made some kind of deal. But yeah, they're sort of like pretty competent, but relatively bland coverage, a little bit like if the AP Wire was covering slightly more in-depth topics. And so it is interesting that they're like, oh, let's have a gaming beat. Yeah, let's see what Totilo does with it.
I had a brief conversation with him, and he said that he was interested in spicing things up. He wants to cover stuff that isn't getting looked at by mainstream press. And he wants to uncover things that aren't getting a lot of coverage already. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. Good luck to him. Another alum from Kotaku is Tim Rogers, friend of the Game Center, and he has. This isn't exactly news because this came out I think January 1st. But he's been doing a bunch of videos on YouTube, long form videos that cover different games. And this most recent one, I think is very, very discourse friendly because it is a 6-hour deep dive on Tokimeki Memorial High School.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, extremely influential early dating sim. Maybe not the very first dating sim, but really like put dating sims on the map. In Japan long before they were a thing in the US. And yeah, I have not watched the 6-hour deep dive, but I have absolute faith in Tim Rogers to explicate this.
Just out of curiosity, thinking like, what the hell? And also because I'm genuinely interested in Tokimeki, and I don't know if I'm going to get around to playing it. But boy, it got me. I mean, I haven't watched the whole 6-hour thing, but it's pretty good. And Tim, who speaks, I think, pretty good Japanese.
Yeah, he's fluent in Japanese.
Yeah, is able to kind of really dig deep on this stuff and talk about it in a pretty detailed way. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I think it's pretty cool. And it's the kind of thing. It's what's interesting to me is that it is a genuinely new kind of journalism. Like this doesn't fit into any of the kind of standard models of how
it's not academic criticism, it's not it's and it doesn't an extremely close look.
It wouldn't fit into Kotaku or Joystick or The Verge or anything like that. But I think he's building an audience for this stuff, and I think he's pretty successful at it. So I think he's got a Patreon or something going. So it's an interesting new form of kind of deep dive pop culture journalism. So
yeah, and while I'm at it, if anybody out there really wants to make these types of YouTube movies, I can easily talk for hours and hours about any given like Marvel Comics character because I've read too many Marvel comics. So if you want me to
Naomi, where are you in this project? It's like 10 years ago.
I'm bogged down in the
arbitrarily to become an expert at Marvel. Where are you now?
Yeah, I don't know. I've read probably about 300,000 pages of the epic that is all the Marvel comics, and it's one continuous story, right? That's why it takes a long time to read it. But I got bogged down in the 90s, which is a very bad time when bad things happen to the business side of the comics industry, and it really affects the storytelling, and it gets all really goopy. So I'm sort of wading through that right now, and I'll probably eventually get out into the 2000s. But yeah, like if you're a video producer out there, you know, I'll just be the talent. You can reap the rewards off of this off of a YouTube channel where I can basically do the same thing as Tim is doing for Japanese games. Yeah. I'm happy to do it for bad superhero comics.
That sounds pretty tempting. All right, let's quickly buzz through this last section. We have a bunch of gaming business news. So right off the top, Microsoft has made an announcement that they're going to match the Epic Store by reducing their take of game sales down to 12%.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, exactly. They're matching Epic. This is a major political move in the world of revenue sharing for game developers.
This puts huge shift. We are watching.
It's really
about what is standard for these big portals to take out of their cut. It's like we're seeing it shift, and like you would not expect this. Like you would not expect. Like in our kind of like simplistic picture of how these things work, it's like, oh no, in capitalism, the needle only goes in one direction and you're just like exploiting people more and more. It's like, but here's a case where it's not clear how, I think a lot of this was genuinely inspired by individuals like Tim Sweeney who were like, you know what, this doesn't feel right. Doesn't seem fair. There's a little bit of business interest. I mean, I'm not saying that he's a philanthropist. He's a businessman.
No, but he's a somewhat idiosyncratic businessman, right? And he's sort of decided like
person, you know. And I think there's some genuine kind of.
And he's also a bit of a game developer at heart, right? Which is quite different than a bunch of. But look, this is Microsoft. This is part of their business strategy now. There's a reason it was announced just recently. This follows on or accompanies their latest investor earnings call, where they announced that they have a new approach to games, which is a little bit less about like we're gonna just make games and put them out, or even just be a publisher of games, that they intend to make money off of the entire ecosystem. I think they called it a metaverse economy, which is a terrible phrase that makes us think of Second Life, but is definitely they're copying from Tim Sweeney, because Tim Sweeney won't shut up about the metaverse, right?
Yeah, he really is.
And now they've got Microsoft talking about the metaverse and being like, we can do 12% too. And so it's clearly all a move in this game where they're like, look, it's not, look, they're looking over at Valve and they're like, hey, those guys just completely stopped making games. They were like, games? Who makes games? We sell games, right? And we've got this whole big, ecosystem of people earning achievements and making friends and whatever, that Microsoft has wanted to have something like that for years. So they're basically saying like, yeah, we're going to make a bunch more money off of Minecraft content creators and like, boosting up the entire economy around Minecraft and other games like that too. And this is definitely part of that. They want to get more people basically signing up to be a Microsoft game and then like be part of their whole like ecosystem of games where games tie into each other, and they're like endless service models that involve you as a content creator and you as a whatever else, right? Selling things to each other, etc. Yeah.
Speaking of Valve, Overgrowth dev and Humble Bundle originator Wolfire Games has just filed an antitrust lawsuit against Valve over Steam fees. So in exactly this issue, I think sensing the blood in the water, right? These guys are like now bringing an antitrust suit against Valve. So it'll be interesting to see if this gets any traction and how this plays out.
Well, there's a lot of people lining up. There's a lot of people lining up against Valve, right? As David Van Duzer noted in chat, Sony just threw $200 million at Epic and are like, okay, we're on your side. And so people might be wondering, like, where's Sony and all this Microsoft stuff? And that's where they are. They're like, hey, we're going to just team up with you, Epic. Microsoft is going to be like, oh, well, we can do this Epic thing too, and also oppose Valve and try to set up our own store. And now, and so Humble, unfortunately, they're on the smaller side, right? So, but they're still big enough to fire off an antitrust suit against Valve. Unfortunately, I don't think this reading through this lawsuit, it doesn't sound like it's going to go anywhere, but it does.
But it's an interesting first gauntlet to throw down.
It's shots fired.
Yeah.
Right. And it makes some legal points that are going to be responded to in court. Right. And there are some interesting things here about, like, okay, Valve restricts what you can do with Steam keys, kind of. Right. But in a vague way. So, like, what's going to happen there? That's probably going to affect Steam keys and probably mess things up for a bunch of indie developers too. I don't know. It's a mess. Like, it's getting heated out there.
All right, 5-minute warning. Let's buzz through the rest of these. We have another bit of big platform news, is that Apple, who last year announced they have new policies about privacy, those have now kicked in, and about 10,000 apps, most of which are games, in the App Store have now updated with a new privacy policy that has to be more transparent. It has to inform people, the users, and give them an option of whether they want to be tracked, whether they want to have personalized ads served up. And so this is an interesting experiment in shift back towards transparency and privacy tools. It's kind of surprising, and again, this is new, I think.
Yeah, let me put it this way. Do you remember when Facebook became no longer a thriving petri dish for profit-raking, like, games? I think this is starting to edge in that direction. It's not as sweeping, but really cracking down on and saying, look, you can't just do whatever you want to make ad revenue off of games. This is only affecting ad data, which is fortunate, because I think there's plenty of legit reasons to gather data directly from your game if you want to track stuff about like player stats. But anything related to ads, if you're using ad data and it's not totally anonymized, you have to get
this is going to shift the ecosystem, and I think probably in a good direction.
Maybe it will wash out a bunch of sketchier stuff. I don't know.
Another little bit of game business news. Activision CEO Bobby Kotick just got a haircut.
Yep,
right.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I guess this is about making shareholders happy, right? Because
I think they laid off a bunch of people. I think they just laid off a ton of people, and they had to close down their esports division.
But there was a bunch of noise when this happened, right? A lot of people were outraged when all these layoffs happened, and Kotick's salary was being bandied about. So clearly enough shareholders got the memo that they were like, this is screwed up. And so, this does not make Bobby Kotick poor or whatever, but it's a slap on the wrist. Like, slaps on the wrist, are they worth it? Probably. Like, why not?
I think it's important to have these kinds of shareholder reins on CEO salaries. So I think this is a
and they bubble up, honestly, through people being angry on social media too. So that's
keep complaining. You complain enough, things get fixed.
Or at least a little bit. Bobby Kotick can get a pay cut. That's what should happen.
Two more items I think we can hit real quick. One is, apparently there's an enormous resurgence in Pokemon card collecting.
Oh, this is causing interesting.
All the third-party services that are doing things like evaluating card quality are melting down. These industries cannot keep up with the demand. People are being arrested at Kmart. They're camping out. People are like, I had no idea that there was this huge renaissance in Pokemon card collecting, but apparently it's blowing up huge.
Yeah, so of course, this is the sad thing to me. A very beloved Pokemon card that has just like scratches and crap all over it is worth nothing. And only, of course, in the collector's market, it's only whatever the pristine version of the card is. And why? I guess that's just purely about scarcity. Like, I can't imagine it being about anything else.
It's arbitrary because that's how values work.
Yeah, but values are not always arbitrary, right? There's plenty of like.
There's always a grain of non-arbitrariness and then a huge amount of network effects. But like a mint Charizard gets you $300,000. That's pretty good stuff.
Right. So I'm just going to go on a limb and say, I remember, I think it was Jason Rohrer or somebody who was like, why are NFTs any worse than baseball cards? And I'll say that, like, to the extent that that a mint Charizard is worth more than a Charizard that has a 3-year-old's or a 6-year-old scribbling on it, that value difference is just as stupid as NFTs, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, but I think the real answer is global warming. I think that's the real.
Yeah, no, you're right. Negative externality. Of course, that's the negative externality is the bigger deal with NFTs. But it's much worse than like chopping trees down for baseball cards.
Okay, 30 seconds. Epic bought ArtStation. Boom.
Yeah. Okay. Another big. Just war chest. We're spending our war chest money. That's what they're doing, right? Like it is crazy moves, like someone said. Is that it? Is that our last?
I think that's our last story. We'll save the next one for. We got a lot of juicy ones for next week.
That's right. And so next week is our season. It's our season finale next week.
Yes.
That will be the semester end episode of the Discourse. The week after that is our showcase, and so we'll be turning over this Twitch channel to streams featuring all of the games from graduating undergrads and grads from the Game Center.
Mark your calendars. When is the showcase? It is on the 21st of May.
The 20th and 21st in the afternoon Eastern time.
Evening of the 20th and the 21st. Everybody, show up for the end of your show. It's going to be off the hook.
Yeah, Frank and I will each be hosting a segment as well as some other faculty members. So come for that. And then stay tuned for announcements later on about the future of the Discourse. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mirabai. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, Naomi. And thank you, chat.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Discourse. Once again, your news hosts have been Naomi Clark and Frank Lance. I was your behind-the-scenes operator, Logan Clare. Graphics are by Winnie Song, and captioning was by Mirabai Knight of Steno Knight Cart Services. As we mentioned, stop by our Game Center showcase May 20th and 21st. The information is on the poster on the screen. We will see you there. That's all for now. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.